Hey everyone, Nick Manning here, and in this video I'll show you how to greatly reduce and simplify your codebase if you're using dependency injection by using InheritedWidget. So it's just going to take a few minutes and you'll come away from this video understanding the benefits of InheritedWidget and why it's great to not have to use something like a third-party package to do something like this. It's very simple, easy to use, and you don't have to worry about all the complexities of these third-party packages to do something like this. So in the last video, we covered how to implement a very simple app where you can search. So on the screen here, as you can see, as I type, it kicks off a search. So the way we do this is that we search a backend, and that backend is abstracted away by using a class called a repository. So we use this repository pattern to work with this backend very easily. The other benefit of the repository is that when we're implementing an integration test, we can mock it. So that's something that's very fundamental to integration tests, something where you have control over what's returned. And in our mocks and our integration test, we have something that is already predetermined in terms of what's coming back from this mock backend. The problem with this is that when we want to inject this user repo that's shared throughout the app, we're passing it down layer after layer in constructors. So in this case, as you see on the screen, we have an app and we pass in a user repository. In the app itself, we pass it into the search screen. And in the search screen, we also have a member here called user repository where we rely on this dependency. And that's basically dependency injection, which is, again, very common. But with InheritedWidget, which we'll create now, is that it becomes very easy because any shared state or any kind of shared data we want to propagate throughout our widget tree, we can access it very easily using the build context. So first, let's create the InheritedWidget, and then I'll show you how it actually works. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a file called appconfig, and I already have it created here. And let's write it out on what we need here to implement an InheritedWidget. So we're going to say extends InheritedWidget here, and it comes with the material package, so that's there and in the imports at the top. And then the first thing we need to do is create a constructor where we pass in our normal key and a child widget, because of the fact that we're going to wrap our entire app with this widget. So we're going to say widget child. So that's one of the variables that we pass into our constructor. And then we call super, pass it the key and the child, like so. So this is very standard Flutter stuff. But what we want to do in our InheritedWidget is have an instance of something that is going to be shared, right? So this is a user repo interface that we implemented last time. We're going to call it user repo, and it's an interface because we can mock it if we choose to. And now we can pass it into our list of constructor arguments. We can say that it's required, and we require a user repo interface. And let me just minimize this simulator, user repo. And that's it. So that's what we have here. Let's see, we have to implement some more methods, so that's why there's an error squiggly. The other thing we're going to do is implement two more methods. One is a static helper method that returns an appconfig object, and that method is called of, and it takes in a build context, so we call it build context here, and what it's going to return is an instance of our appconfig. And the way we do that is we can call context, and there's a special method called depends on InheritedWidget of exact type. And what you do with this method here is that you pass in the type of what it returns. So here in this case, it's at an appconfig object. And what it does is it will take this context. If you invoke this, it will walk up the widget tree using that context, and if it finds something called appconfig, where appconfig is an InheritedWidget, it will return it, or else it'll return null. So that's our helper method here. The other thing we want to implement for InheritedWidget is update should notify, and this is something we override. and bool update should notify. And there's no argument we need to pass here because we're going to just return false. What this means is that if it's false, if there's any updates to data in this class, we don't want to have to update the UI for any widgets that inherit that are wrapped by this inherited widget. We don't need to make any updates, so we just say false. That's another topic for another video if we want to actually update the widget tree when data changes here. But for now, for performance reasons, we don't need to update any UI or anything in their widgets if something here is updated. So we don't have to worry about that. So that's it for our app config. Let's see this error here. Okay, so I have to do this user repo. That's why there was an error. And let's see, user repo interface, that's it, remove type annotation. So yeah, that's what we need. We have to say this.user repo because whatever is passed in here gets assigned to our private member. Cool, so in main.dart now, all I have to do is wrap the entire app with a app config. So I say app config, and I give it a user repo, and it's gonna be an instance of an actual user repo, and it's a constant, and then the child will be our app right here. So that's what we're going to do. And let's see, we'll make this constant. We're going to import app config here. And I think that's it. App's going to be constant right here. Let's update our app now. We can clean our code up. So we're going to remove this. We're going to remove the thing that's passed in here. In our search screen, we're not going to need to pass in a user repo to search. Let's remove user repo from search. Let's update the constructor. And now this is really cool because now when I want to access this app config, we don't have to say widget.userrepo, which is our private member. We can just say app config and then and then we say context, and then we can access the user repo like this. And where we have to, in this method, pass in a build context. And then when it's invoked here, we're going to pass in, see on change, if every time a user types in a letter, we're going to pass in its value. So we're on search field change, we're going to pass in the context and the value. And we just have to now import this app config. And that's it. That's how you kind of access this app config inherited widget. We say app config of and then context. And normally in a real application, this would return potentially a null. So we want to handle that. We would show an error. If it is null here, we forcibly unwrap it. And that's fine because we know what it's going to do. And the last thing we have to do is update our integration test. So here in our integration test, which we wrote in the last video, we have a mock user repo and an app config. Here's what I've updated. When I run my app, I wrap it in an app config again, but we pass in this time a mock user repo instead of a normal user repo. And that shows you how flexible it is to use dependency injection with inherited widgets. So that's it. That's our app. It runs, it compiles. You already know how it works. So I showed it in the beginning, so I don't want to have to show you again. But that's how beneficial inherited widgets are. I'll open this file once again to show you how simple this is. Again, to recap, you create an inherited widget. You have a constructor where you pass in the key and a child, and then whatever you'd like for instantiating private members. In our case, we have a user repo. And then we have a helper method you can implement if you'd like. And it leverages something called context, depends on inherited widget of exact type. So again, that's optional. And then finally, you can override this method that the parent provides, which is called update should notify, which lets you kind of update your widget tree reactively if something in this class changes. So I hope that made sense. I hope that you find this useful if you're using dependency injection. And please subscribe. I add videos every week or two, and I'll see you in the next video.